He works for Nutrien Ag Solutions, where he develops predictive analytical software solutions to manage weather risk for global production agriculture. He provides frequent weather updates that focus on how high-impact weather events, which we saw a slide earlier of a lot of one of those weather events that came through the end of June, influence global agriculture productivity. Before transitioning to Nutrien Ag Solutions, Eric was the director of undergraduate studies for the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at U of I in Urbana-Champaign, where he received numerous prestigious teaching awards. Eric currently serves as the chair of the Alumni Council for the Department of Atmospheric Sciences at the U of I. Eric presents his research as a featured speaker at over 120 conferences annually, where he provides logistical guidance and solutions to weather-sensitive financial institutions, farmers, commodity traders, and other stakeholders. Lucky for those of us in central and southern Illinois, Eric still calls Champaign County home and has become a favorite speaker of Fielding Forward programs through the years. Eric's weather updates can be found in Farm Credit's Essential e-newsletter. Let's welcome Eric.
Who wrote that thing? I think what it should say is chubby dad in basement forecast weather and tells people about it. That's really what my life is about, and hopefully today, before you all start smelling lunch, I'm going to give you some good news. Like, that's my goal. Matt would love it if I could come in and give you a massive problem in Brazil that can finally spark some movement. I will do my best, but they don't sometimes care what I say. So why don't we do this? Let's dig into this stuff, and hopefully if I show you a few videos of tornadoes and stuff, you'll wake back up and be ready to think about what this upcoming season is going to be. First of all, I want to give everybody something completely free. Many of you probably know about it, but if you just go to this website, agweather.com, all of my content goes there. ag-wx.com. You can sign up for my weekly newsletter. They go out on Monday midday. I produce daily videos. They're linked there, and every map I make is available on that site. By the way, it's just ag-wx.com. WX is how we abbreviate weather. That's Morse code for weather. That's why we do that. All right, so this is what I want to get into. That was earlier this week. That's what the winds look like. We broke pressure records in Illinois and Indiana, lowest pressure we'd ever measured, and we think we're going to break it again on Friday and early Saturday morning. That was a monstrous low pressure system sitting and spinning right over us. My problem with it is it came out of Texas and went straight to Chicago. Don't like those. I want them to go from Texas to Paducah. If it goes from Texas to Paducah, we will have a lot of snow out on the ground to play around in, and I like snow for through mid-January. Then after that, I'm done with it. So we need to see if we're going to be able to get anything else like this coming through, because this is what it did in terms of snowpack just over the last few days. And 2 days ago, I got to drive up to Iowa City, and on my way there, the last 40 miles took about 3 hours, and it looked something like this out of my truck dash cam. If you don't have one of these things, get one. They're a lot of fun. They can also save you from getting in trouble when the morons around you do something. But I'm up here driving just in about 15 inches of snow, and I shouldn't show this, though, to Nutrien, because I didn't realize I was actually speeding. The speed limit was 25, and you see the little thing blinking right there saying, "Hey, moron, you are going over the speed limit." But I was late. I had to get there for a dinner. I know that's no excuse, but it was a pretty rough go of it here in Iowa. Again, last 40 miles took 3 hours for me to get to where I needed to go. I want to show you something kind of fun about ice. I'm sure many of you were taught this as kids, but it's kind of a neat thing to remember. All ice crystals, when they start to grow, like when two water molecules create a permanent hydrogen bond between the hydrogen and the oxygen, you link 6 of them together to create an ice crystal. So no matter how far you keep zooming in on ice, this is an electron microscope view of it, you'll keep finding that they break up into hexagons. And it's kind of neat. I brought along a little visualization I used to use in my class of what liquid water looks like as it freezes. But because of that, you end up getting a lot of air that's trapped in between those molecules, some free space. And that free space that's trapped in between there is actually why, in terms of water, which is one of only 2 substances on Earth that does this, the solid state is less dense than the liquid state. So that's why ice floats in a cup. This is also the reason why, if you were to hear the phrase like, "Oh, if I get an inch of rain, how much snow should you get out of it?" About 10 inches, right? That's partly because of this. That's partly because of the density change between ice and liquid. Now, I mentioned earlier we've got another system that's on its way, and it's about to hit Chicago. Back when I was a professor at Illinois, I'll never forget the Groundhog's Day blizzard of 2011. You down here got rain. A little north of you got about 4 inches of ice. In Champaign, we got 7 inches of sleet and 3 inches of snow. Chicago, 2 feet of snow. And just shut the city down. That is Lakeshore Drive. Just if you want to remember what life was like back then. My students did not come back to class for a week. They were trapped up in Chicago after that weekend. It was a pretty rough go of it here. And this is what I've got for you tomorrow. And I think it could shut the city down again. I was supposed to fly to Chicago on Monday, not a chance. I rebooked for Nashville because as this massive low goes right over parts of Champaign, ends up almost over Fort Wayne eventually, we expect the pressure to bottom out maybe below 980 millibars. In my nerd world, that's super duper low pressure. You won't care, I'll care because I like learning about records. This is going to be nasty. And the problem is it didn't go to Paducah first. If you wanted that to all change over to snow, you got to get a system to hook south of you. And this isn't going to do it. So this is what I have to share with you in terms of bad news. Because if you want snow, like I do at this time of year, watch where this low is going to go. It's going to come out of Texas, go straight through the state, right up into Michigan. You get snow on the backside, but not a ton. So we call this system, it's the actual term of it, it's called a panhandle hooker. Remember me telling about that a couple years ago? Panhandle hooker. Now, when I go to Texas and Oklahoma, we don't call them panhandle hookers because their minds start to wander, but it starts right there in the panhandles and it hooks. It hooks south, goes over Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, up into Indiana. I'm going to show it to you one more time so you get an idea of what to expect over the next probably 48 to 60 hours. A lot of rain, quick snap over to colder weather, snow will come in on the backside of it, and then it's going to get really windy and brutally cold. That's going to be the bad news for today. Now, I got to stop here because Matt wants me to tell you that there's a disaster in Brazil. And I think I should just do that real quick because I think the situation unfolding in Brazil should have already produced some market-moving information, and yet no matter how hard I try or as many people as I tell, we don't seem to get it. And I think it's because of what Matt shared with you. It's all about how the numbers pan out on both the supply and demand side of things. And he gave you a benchmark, didn't he? He says if we could get the USDA tomorrow to come out with a number below 150, or CONAB to give you a number below 150, or StoneX, or somebody to come out and say that the crop is in really bad shape, then all of a sudden we'll start to see some price movement. But it's got to be way below 150. And I'm going to give you what I think it could be right now in just a few moments, but I want to make sure you all remember something. I pulled these same slides out of my presentations from all of last winter on Brazil so that you don't forget it. This is the most important thing about Brazil. Over there on the right is a calendar. The bars are precipitation month by month, but it's the crop calendar that is critical to Brazil's success. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute, shouldn't I be worried about yield and production? Sure, but Brazil's massive advantage over the United States, which you're going to see in a few moments, means that sometimes their yield deviations don't matter as much as what they just put into production in terms of acreage. I'll come back to that in a moment. But this is what you got to remember. At some point in late September, the rains return after their winter dry season. Remember, Southern Hemisphere, their winter, our summer. And when those rains begin, they're waiting on 2 inches of rain to get into the fields, and they want to plant everything by the time we're in mid to late November. They want to do that because they got to get that soybean crop in so that at some point in late January and all of February, they're getting it harvested so that they can immediately put in behind it a second crop, a safrinha crop. That term doesn't apply anymore, to be honest with you. We used to use that term safrinha because it translated as second or small, but that second crop is now massive. What did Matt tell you? They're the biggest exporter of corn right now, and that safrinha crop is mostly corn. They will literally follow the combine harvester with a planter putting in beans. And he's not lying about some of these mega growers. Every summer I have 2 groups of Brazilian growers come up and meet with me at the University of Illinois. And when we sit down and talk with them, I have to have a translator because I don't speak Portuguese yet. And as we go through things, there was a guy literally sitting as far away from me as you are that was part owner of a 500,000 hectare operation. 500,000 hectares of land. And I said, well, who brings you up to the States? Because I forgot who they were sponsored all by, and it was John Deere. Because this dude owned 48 combines. Now, I know Matt's story was bigger, but whatever. 48 combines this guy owned. And he's sitting here looking at all this stuff, and I'm saying, what's your problem? What are you worried about this next year? He says, I'm worried if the monsoon doesn't come in on time. I said, why do you worry about that? He goes, because if I can't get going when I'm supposed to get going, my entire crop production calendar is messed up. And I said, you know that we love it when your crop production calendar is a mess, right? He's like, yeah, we know, because our export markets cover their timing differences. And we got to think about that today. If you want to know what the monsoon looks like, it looks like that. Flow comes out of the tropics, goes over the Amazon, and rains like mad in the middle part of Brazil. Matt used a term called the Cerrado, all right? The Cerrado is this area right here. It's this big spot here. And what I'm circling here is 2 times the size of the U.S. Corn Belt. That's how big of an area we're talking about. And in this, oh, you can't see my cursor. Where is it? Oh, forget it, because lasers don't work on these really awesome screens. That's why it wasn't working, Andy. You can't point at this cool screen. Anyway, it's there, and it's big in the middle, all right? Now, what happens in Brazil is as that flow comes around, it's met with cold fronts that come out of the south, just like that. So their cold fronts, cold air's down here, rolls up through parts of Argentina, and where it meets in the middle, an average week right now gets 3 to 4 inches of rain. Now, if it was the middle of your growing season and I gave you an inch of rain, you'd be talking about bin busting crops. You wouldn't even care about crop insurance. For them, this time of year, 1 inch of rain puts them in drought per week if they only got 1 inch per week. So we're just seeing what's been going on, and we need to put it into the context of history. So Matt mentioned CONAB, right? I kind of think it as the USDA equivalent of down there, right? 1977, first bit of data. This is to present. These are 3 curves you're all familiar with. Top one is yield, middle one is production, the bottom one is area planted. They're on 2 different axes, but I just want you to see their shape. You multiply this curve times the top curve and you get the middle one. And that middle one is key to everything because that is their exponential production curve. Now I always get asked, and I've shown it for the last 3 years, how do we compare to Brazil? So I'm going to use the same units they do, so it's not bushels per acre, but it's kilograms per hectare, or millions of tons, or millions of hectares, right? I'm going to convert the USDA numbers over to it so you can see how we compare, and it looks something like that. The dashed line are ours in the US, the solid are theirs. They out-yield and out-produce, and their biggest advantage is right here. The fact that we're not adding more acres, and they are. And we want to know how many more they're going to be able to add. Because in the last decade, up until last year, they added the equivalent of both Illinois and Missouri in total production that wasn't there the previous decade. And by the way, if you're curious how big these areas are, that's the actual size of those states overlaid right there inside of Mato Grosso and Tocantins and Goiás. It is huge, a huge growing area. Last year, they added 6 million acres. That's half of an Illinois soybean crop that just came into production a year ago. But because of where demand is globally, we think they added half of that this year, so something around 3 million acres. But I'm going to give you the same number I gave a group down here last year that you've got to think about. It's that number at the top there, 400 million. So you remember how Matt said they have area to expand? 2 studies, one done in the US, one done in Brazil, both arrived at the same number. This does not include the Amazon. If they take land from their Cerrado, which is right there in the middle, that is currently pasture, and decide to grow corn, soybeans, whatever. They can grow whatever they want, cotton, sugarcane. They have 400 million acres to use. So when I had those groups of Brazilians here this past summer, I said, hey, does that number make sense to you all? Go, yeah, it does. That's what we've been told. We know we have some of that land. I said, how good a ground is it? Like, it's not good. That's not our best. We're already farming our best ground. I said, well, what does it take to put that in production? He goes, 10 years. Not all 400 million. I said, well, how much then? He said about 50 million acres is what we're planning on. We think that the demand over the next 10 years will make us put in 50 million of 400 million acres new into production. I said, well, does it take all 10 years to get there? He goes, yeah, it's going to take us a long time. They got to first go through and either clear or burn off all the shrubs. Then they have to go in and get the rocks out of it, turn the soil over, let the cattle go on it for about 5 to 8 years, then pump it full of nutrients to get the pH right and get everything right so they can start to farm it. I said, will it yield like your other ground? He goes, no, it's not going to be our best ground. We've already used our best ground. But the reality is if we need these acres to use, they're cheap. We have the labor to put them into production, and we'll probably go after 50 million of it. That means that curve I showed you is going to continue to go up for another 10 years, probably at the same rate. And if there's demand, I said, who's your demand coming from? Of course, they said, well, China's our biggest demand. And then they told me one thing right after that I'll never forget. because they were asking me, this was in August, what's it going to take to get another dollar back in the corn market? I'm like, you're not going to get a dollar back in the corn market. It's raining in Illinois. We rained in July and August after that massive derecho that Andy showed you. And I said, so after this, we're in much better shape. And they're like, shoot. I said, so what does that make you think? They said, well, first of all, and this is the first thing they said, we don't like to hold our own currency. We'd rather have a soybean in the bin based off the US dollar than their own Brazilian, I think it's the real. I said, that's shocking. And I said, well, you mentioned the bin. I said, I thought everything you farmed, you immediately put on a truck and took it out. And he said, not anymore. For the last 10 years, we've been putting on-farm storage, so we can do the same thing that you all do up here, which is hold grain for better market prices. These are two massive things that have been shifting around, in addition to these acres in Brazil. We have to be thinking a lot about them. Now, Matt mentioned there's troubles. I can echo that. On January 1st, the map in the back shows you root zone soil moisture. Amazon near record dry early, which means when the flow comes over the Amazon steals some of the moisture, which means the northern half of the Cerrado was extremely dry. The southern part, flooding all the way back into September. We're not measuring rainfall in southern Brazil right now in inches. We're using feet to measure it. It's been so wet. In Argentina, which has been in a long 2-year drought, its main growing areas have broken out of that drought. And right now, I just looked, the October, November, December precipitation totals were well above trend. And we think that that crop that's coming back in Argentina, was just reported the other day, 51 million metric tons, that's a lot of grain that wasn't there a year ago. This map summarizes where we've been. This one also shows you how dry it's been. October, November, December, the beginning of their growing season. The map shows you a rank in terms of numbers going back to 1979. So here's 3 different data sets, same story. This one comes from our own government, the Climate Prediction Center. What I did was I looked at it and I said, since 1979, if we look at every October, November, December since 1979, where does it rank? 44 would be the wettest, like in southern Brazil. 0 would be the driest. So that's a data set that said it's the driest start to any growing season that we have data for, going back to 79. Well, what about going back beyond that? This one shows you, well, not beyond that, but 1981, same time period, but just a little bit different data set. Same scenario, October to the end of December, extremely dry in Mato Grosso. The big one right there, Mato Grosso, you can put 8 Illinois inside of that one. Very wet south. And then I put this out this morning trying to help the markets for all of you. I tweeted it, I'm like, look, even the ERA 5 data set, this is one of the best global precipitation data sets we've got. These are precipitation anomalies going back to World War II. And right now, October, November, December is the new record driest. This is all I can do to push the markets in a direction to tell you there are problems in the Cerrado right now. Why the markets don't care, Matt already told you. Argentina's back online. That number has to go down well below 150 in terms of total production for anybody to start to think about it being a market mover, which means we may not even hear about evidence of how bad this crop is for another 6 weeks. So I kept looking at it, and I said, well, tell me about how good it looks from outer space. Those 3 states, which include Mato Grosso, Goiás, and Rondônia, those 3 at the center west, that red dot right there tells you that we are well below average in terms of the NDVI values as stared at from space. Let's keep going toward the north and east. It's even worse, bottom 80%. Last year, top, this year, down. Come to southern Brazil, see the states highlighted there? That's one spot that's possibly doing okay, southern Brazil. But what I've got highlighted for you there is only about 40% of their total production. The problem is this. That's the Argentinian crop. And right now, it's here in terms of its health. Average is the black line, the gray is the distribution over 20 years. A year ago, we were there. Argentina's back. We need major problems there, too, if you want to see issues like the fact that the market won't make a break up on weather. You got to see problems in Argentina as well. So I'm going to give you my estimate. Looking back at analog years on yield, that's all this is, for 3 different regions, you can see them all labeled here, what we find is that most of the Brazilian crop will likely be off somewhere between 7 and 12%. If it is off 12%, based off the 160 number, we should be cracking below 150 metric ton. And several of us have come out with that estimate based off of the 2016 data. But we're all in this wait and see mode. The markets do not care about the future right now. The markets are playing the whole story of the boy who cried wolf too many times, right? What happened this past year in 2023? We're like, this crop is terrible. We've been the driest for 45 days. It's not rained since May the 8th, and there's problems. And like, well, actually, never mind. It was a massive crop. And here we are again saying there's problems. It's not rained for 3 straight months in some places. And the markets are saying, prove me that it's actually a problem there and that these numbers are correct. So this is where we're standing right now when it comes to weather issues in Brazil. We want to know what the real problem is. Anytime there's drought issues, it's all about where the moisture is getting pulled from. So in the future, if there's going to be a problem in north central Brazil, you listen to guys like me talk about how they're pulling air from the subtropics, not out of the tropics. For the last 15 days, they've been pulling air out of the tropics. Humid air goes over the Amazon, and it's been raining. That's what the last 2 weeks looks like in terms of total precipitation. Those same areas that were the record dry from October to November to December, just in the last 2 weeks picked up anywhere between 100 and some places up to 300 millimeters of rainfall. So this is 4 inches, this is 8 inches, and some places over 10 inches of rain. And their soils can handle it. Argentina is starting to get me worried about them having too much rainfall right now. If you take a look down in Argentina, Cordoba, if I put you on a plane right now blindfolded and flew you down there, didn't tell you where you were going, got you off the plane and pointed your eyes east when you landed, you would not know you weren't in Illinois. That's what Cordoba looks like. If you looked west, you might see the Andes Mountains and know something is up, but if you looked east, you wouldn't. That's what it's like down here. They just had this past weekend an 11-inch rainfall event on some of their best ground. But how much ground was hurt? That's what we don't know. So we're questioning if that rain was enough to bring the crop back. Now, if you would like to know the perfect scenario to really cause a terrible ending for Brazil, I will give you what it's got to be. Ready? It's got to be this. The newest forecast has a little drier air coming in next week. Not a problem. Don't worry about the dry now. That has to happen. Now, what is that? The greens and blues mean wetter than average. They want to harvest this crop fast, about the 3rd, 4th week of January and the first 2 weeks of February. If it comes in super wet, the late planted stuff stays green longer, delays the crop calendar. If it stays super wet, the beans that were compromised planted early that dealt with the heat and drought stress, they're going to be pushed into the ground with extremely heavy rainfall. Everybody, is there any Brazilians in here? Because then I'll feel terrible for saying all this stuff. Okay, good. We all need this to happen. You want it to start raining and not stop raining for another 6 weeks. And by the way, if it does that, your corn prices will respond as well. Because right now the biggest worry is, in an El Nino year, which we are currently in, the monsoon tends to slow down a little bit earlier than normal, in April rather than May. Now what's the significance? If we're going to delay getting soybeans out, that means we're going to delay planting safrinha corn. And if it's delayed planting and then the monsoon shuts off early, that means you have not very much rain during grain fill. So the best case scenario is that it starts raining and doesn't stop. Odd, right? We don't want more drought. We actually want it to start pouring the rain and quit April 15th. Then you can have a lot of money back in the market. I think that would happen. But I don't get to wish cast. So I'm sorry, but tomorrow when I wake up and forecast the weather, if it's different, it's not my fault. But I'll tell you if that changes. Now I want to stop here and I want to ask, what do you want me to tell you? If there's something floating around in your head about Brazil, ask me some questions about it so we can get it. Just shout it out, I'll repeat it so everybody can hear it. What do you still want to know more about Brazil before I get into the second part of this?
What's the cost differences that differ between here and there?
Sure, they're super high input, so the question was how are they making 30%? By the way, they did make 30% last year. They made about 8 or 9%, which is still phenomenal, but they were doing that for about a decade. One of the big things is land is super cheap. You could go buy an acre in the Amazon right now if you want, like Rondônia, Northern Mato Grosso, Tocantins, Para. You could buy an acre for $300. And they have pretty wide availability of inputs because every major input seller wants to go down there and sell stuff to them. And there are also differences in their tax structure, and there are differences in the way that they are able to quickly sell that grain to big buyers. So Matt could probably answer more of those questions, but I'll tell you this about Brazil to compare to the U.S. 2018, there was a party down there, and I've told this many times, but it's worth remembering. was a party in Brasilia, the capital, where there were about 100 politicians and dignitaries and those kind of important people, and then they invited 900 of their biggest growers. So there was 1,000 people in the room, and a reporter got a hold of the guest list and went and calculated the worth of that room. So 1,000 people, 900 of them were farmers, 42% of Brazil's GDP was there. So on top of that, this is their leading industry. And so it's actually very supported by whoever is in power. They will not do anything to lose Brazil's ag dominance. That's their Silicon Valley. That's their tech. I mean, it's all ag. That's what I can tell you. Matt probably has a better answer for you than that. But yeah. Yeah, so the question was, recent flip in politics in Argentina, new president down there. Seems like a pretty shoot from the hip wild guy, right? I mean, I'm just basing off social media. To be honest, I can't give you a straight answer to it, but I will just tell you this. If you think the problems with the currency in Brazil are bad, Argentina is infinitely worse. And every Argentinian farmer would rather have a soybean or a corn kernel than anything else. So how the new presidency is going to be handling their ag decisions, I just don't know. Anybody else have a comment on that can maybe shed some light on this? Okay, good. We none of us know. At least the brave ones that would like to speak up. Good questions. What else about Brazil? By the way, you ask about presidents. Every time so Lula's back in office in Brazil now. He is very much against deforestation. So when he's in office, deforestation rates go down in the Amazon. So he was in there for 2 terms, and now he's back again. In between, they kind of go up and down. But the reality is, law in Brazil is if you buy an acre of land in the Amazon, you only get to farm 10% of it. But at $300 an acre, you still have a return on that investment there. What other questions about Brazil? There's got to be one more floating around.
If this happens, what about the quality of the beans?
Yeah. So the biggest issue with the quality of the beans is for those folks that don't have the ability to dry or the ability to store, they have to put them on a truck. And what happens is you put wet beans on a truck, you all know what happens to that. And back in 2020, southern Brazil had a bunch of flooding, and they just harvested beans and had to get them out on the Paraná River, so they had to truck them down there. And I watched video after video of them opening up those trucks, and they have to go in and kind of like chop the beans out. They were all just a wet mess, a moldy mess. That would be the other big issue I think you could be thinking about. Quality's going to be a problem. Okay, these are good questions. And I hope this kind of provides a little bit of insight on Brazil. Now, I just saw them bring out the food back there, so if you start smelling it and you turn around, I will accept it. We're going to blame Andy for that one, all right? All right, let's go to some other spots here. How about the Panama Canal? Most of Central America is fine. Take a look right there, the Panama Canal. Matt brought this up. That area over the last 3 months is in record exceptional drought. Now, if you're curious what the problem is, look at the video, but don't look at the top. Look at the bottom. That lake is the problem. Remember Matt mentioning this? That lake is the high point in the lock and dam system. So if there's a drought on that lake, the whole system becomes really inefficient. And that drought map I showed you a minute ago was right, let me show you the lake. It's like that. Oh, no, I'll show you it next. That lake is smack dab in the middle of this. Matt showed some stuff from Susan. She has a great Twitter follow. I like her. She's fantastic. I said, hey, can I show this? This is a good one. She found a ship that was supposed to come through here, but because of the traffic backup in the Panama Canal, they decided to go around the southern tip of South America. Now, if you'd like to know where the worst weather in the world is, it's the southern tip of South America. They were willing to take this entire ship all the way down there, then wait in line. That's like Tierra del Fuego and Patagonia. And this is the worst place in the world to go. They put in a $4 million bid, got accepted, turned around, went back. That's the going asking rate right now. It's $4 million to get to the front of the line. You know who pays the most to get to the front of the line? Cruise ships. They get to go through first. And it looks something like this right now. All those dots and icons are where ships are waiting. The lake, this is what I want to show you, is right there in the middle. See it? And that lake is very low. Here's a satellite view of that same lake. And I zoomed in on this image because there's some really good high-resolution satellites. And you see these little lines in here? Those are all ships at anchor waiting to go through the canal. Normally, if you were to see this map when there wasn't a problem, there would not be any of that. They just all get lined up and they go through. This is going to be a problem all the way to June. And the reason for that is we're now into the dry season for the Panama Canal. So they went into the dry season dry we can't correct this action anytime soon. So that's what's happening down there. Here, this was your December. Anybody shown you this yet? These are the ranks for our December temperatures. The Midwest and Upper Midwest just had its warmest December on record, and you can thank El Nino for doing that. That's what El Ninos do. They typically bring in a lot of early winter warm weather. And that's why in all my forecast commentary and videos, I kept saying, winter's going to get you on the backside, not on the front side. And just so that you know, so I can continue to ruin your morning, this is it. This morning in Montana, it was -8. And guess where that air is going? Here, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's Monday and Tuesday of next week. These are low temp. Yeah, Boo is right. This is terrible. This is coming in. Now, I almost always get asked, is this going to freeze over the Mississippi? No, it's not. The Mississippi has other problems to deal with right now. There's some brutally cold air coming in, and basically over the next 10 days, we're off my color bar in terms of averages. So right there in Iowa, Missouri, and Illinois, for the next 10 days, we're going to be averaging more than 20 degrees colder than the climatological normal. But the atmosphere, about 3 days ago, I think took a quadruple dose of Viagra, and it's about to just extend all the way across the Pacific Ocean. That's a terrible reference. I can't believe my mind was thinking about that right now. But as it does that, it's going to finish in the west and just flood it back over with mild air again. Just push it all in. So the jet stream will start, get this, it's going to start in Africa, on the Saharan Desert. It'll go across the Persian Gulf area. It'll go across India. It'll eventually go across southern parts of Asia, hit Japan, go across the open Atlantic Ocean, 20,000 miles of winds, 150 to 250 miles an hour. And it's going to finish in California. Whenever that happens, we get a break. It slows down for us. It all targets west. But right now, every state in the U.S. has some sort of weather watch, weather advisory, or weather warning. All because of that monster I showed you a few minutes ago before we talked about Brazil and the other places. And this was early this morning when I was finishing up my reports and getting out of town. But you can see it's wind, it's snow, and all the shading in the northern plains up there, that's all wind chill warnings already being issued. By the way, do you remember earlier I told you that number 400 million? I kind of wanted to wait to this map to make some more sense of it. 400 million acres is the equivalent land area from Texas and Louisiana to Minnesota to Montana. That's 400 million acres. That's what Brazil still has left. So can you visualize a little bit better on that map? That's a lot of land to put into production. But right now, it's a mess. And did you all hear about the avalanche the other day out west? It collapsed. I don't know if they found those guys yet. I didn't hear about it by the time I went to bed last night. Pretty rough. South, another outbreak of severe weather. We had almost 500 reports of severe weather with the previous system, starting in Texas, and then it went across and hit the southeast. Well, tonight, we're watching Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, and then tomorrow it's going to be in the southeast yet again, enhanced risk by the Storm Prediction Center. So a bunch of my storm chasing friends are on vacation down there chasing all the severe weather. We're going to get stuck right in the middle. You already saw this. With rain, a lot of it. Don't be surprised if you hear some thunder tomorrow, by the way, and then snow on the backside as it all flips around. I like to use these models to predict the weather. I make all the maps you see on my presentations, and here's another set of them. Two best models in the world, GFS and the European, playing this forward through the next 10 days. There goes system number 1. Cold air comes in behind it. This weekend, there's system number 2 that's going to sneak in, maybe giving you some snow early next week, and then there's another one coming into the northwest after that. We've got lots and lots of activity that's going to be coming across the U.S. If you're curious, this is the latest forecast for snow. I showed you the picture from Chicago. They're expecting possibly in the Chicagoland area 15 to 20 inches in some few locations. Down here around us, if we get a good dust and good coating, that's what you should expect. Champaign folks, don't buy that number just yet. It's a little too high, I think. I think we're a little too high on the forecast. But we could be getting snow as far south as the mid-south, all the way over to the mid-Atlantic coming up. If you're curious, this is the chance you've got of getting 3 inches. And you can see the nice big fat donut hole called Southern Illinois in there, where your probabilities are low. You have too much rain early, and when the snow comes around, it's exiting so fast you just don't have enough time to really pile it up here. But the farther north you go, the bigger the hit's going to be. Now this is going to be a big change from a year ago, because all the snow last year was in the western mountains. Some spots in Utah and in the Sierra Nevada picked up over 900 inches of snow in the whole season. The northern plains picked up a ton as well, but you compare it to average, Well, Rod, I see you sitting back there smiling. Did you have to get out your snow shovel at all last year? No, I didn't either. My son cleared off the driveway every time we got a dusting with the leaf blower. What I'm saying is we might actually finally get some good snows here. By the way, out west, they're still waiting on their big snows. A year ago, this whole map was blue. Tons of snow. They're still waiting on it this year. But only 3 times in my professional career have I, in January, been able to tell people that there is no drought right now in the state of California. 25 years, only 3 times have we actually not had drought in California. Amazing to think about that. So they're waiting on snow, but they can wait a little bit longer. All right, good news. With the next 2 systems coming through, we stay above average on precipitation. That's what that green represents right there in the mid part of the country. And Matt says, Eric, is there a disaster coming in 2024? That's the last question I got to answer for you today. Is there a disaster? And I say no, if that is gone by the time we're talking in April. Now, what is this? This is the most important map you all need to see today, to look at it. If you've snoozed off or you're looking at your phone, look up at the screen. This is the root zone soil moisture. And what this is showing is that the Mississippi Basin, you go down 100 centimeters, about 40 inches, we have some places that when you compare to the historical distribution are in the lowest 2%. This is your biggest vulnerability coming out of winter. What I mean by this is that any growing season coming up, if you say, Eric, assess my risk, your drought risk, your risk of developing drought at the beginning of any growing season in this part of the state is 28%. 28 in 100 years, you develop drought going forward. If I toss in the fact that the preseason drought in the soil moisture was already there, that number goes all the way up to 60%. Which means right now, from now until April, that has to get fixed. How do you fix it? You all need to hate everything I'm going to tell you for the next 3 months. You want to hate winter. You want a superactive freeze-thaw cycle that destroys our roads. You want massive snows followed by massive rains. You want ice. We want everything that's terrible. Because the worst winters we can get give us the best following summers. And that'll cure all of this issue down here. That is the issue that took the Mississippi River so low, such that even with all of the rain in the last that's the last 7 days of rainfall. Look at my color bar over here. There's places that are 2 to 6 inches of rain hitting parts of the Mississippi Basin. And did it respond? No. The Mississippi River this morning is still 2 feet below low stage. You want to know the reason why? The first stealer of the water when it falls out of the sky is the ground. It gives it to the river last. So we're waiting on the river to come up because a year ago right now we were already 17 feet and we'd cured our drought issues getting into spring. And it wasn't until we got into this fall that the problems came back again. I took a picture of the river back on December the 3rd. I was down in Memphis with my son. If you've ever been down there, the Bass Pro Shop pyramid thing, go to it and go up on the observation deck. And my son's like, Dad, what are we taking pictures of up here? And I'm like, well, the sand. He's like, why? Because that's normally covered with 20 feet of water. He's like, oh. Now, he didn't know this, but we stayed there for 4 hours, not to sit on every four-wheeler and get into every boat and shoot all the guns. We stayed there because I wanted to count barges, and I counted 1. That was it. 4 hours on a Sunday afternoon. 1 barge went by Memphis in Mississippi. So the problems are there. This came out while Matt was speaking this morning. That's your newest drought monitor. And yesterday I was in Iowa, and they are freaking out for 2 reasons, and I'll give them both to you. It's very dry there, even with all that snow that just came in. And it's dry there, and this is a very important map for you all to take in. Because over the last 4 years, if you add up all the rainfall we got and compared it to normal, this map shows surplus and deficit. And there are parts of Iowa that are more than 40 inches behind normal over the last 4 years. The only thing that saved their crop is just-in-time rains. And in Iowa, this is bullet point number 2, there's a meteorologist who has long since retired that has been telling them all to expect a massive drought in the year 2025. Now, he's retired. It doesn't matter what he says anymore because if it happens or doesn't happen, it doesn't affect the rest of his career. He can't be fired if he's wrong. But they all think that this is the precursor to this massive drought. Now, what's 43 inches of rain? They're off rainfall in a 4-year time period by missing 16 months worth of moisture. And they know that it's dry. Now you look across the rest of the country. Now again, this is from 2020 to the end of 2023. Down here, we're actually technically at a surplus. Why? Because of wetter years in the past, not the most recent one. And they're curious what that's going to look like as we press forward in this forecast. So here I am. I'm going to forecast for you. I'm going to give you what I think might happen in 2025. And if you want, you can ask me questions or just go get in line. I get it. This is the big thing, El Nino, right? We always talk about it, don't we? El Nino, there it is. The warm water that runs across the equatorial Pacific. I want to make sure you know something simple about El Nino. Everybody wants to blame everything on it, and that's ridiculous. Because El Nino and its impact on global weather patterns, it's always an undercurrent. It's a background thing. If you said correlate El Nino weather to southern Illinois weather in winter, spring, it doesn't matter. Its correlation coefficient at best is 0.3. Now, if you don't know what that means almost uncorrelated. You see, it's all the sub-seasonal things that roll on top of this that are important. So listen to me very carefully right now. If we're going to run the risk of having drought next year, listen, if there's going to be a drought risk next year, between now and April, the only thing that I'm able to watch, there's only one thing to watch. The only thing that I'm able to watch is where I've written the letters PDO and PMM. Now, I know you've heard a lot of acronyms today. What you just need to remember is, if I keep showing you this map and it gets bluer and bluer and bluer in that area, we are in trouble. Now, if it gets redder and redder and redder, the West is in trouble and we're in great shape. That is the only preseason indicator, which is what drives people like Matt and I absolutely bat crazy when there's meetings like this where you bring somebody else up here who just predicts problems. You notice they do that all the time? There's going to be a disaster next year, guarantee it. Well, why do they say that? Because they probably sell you a subscription. And if you say disaster, you're going to read it. And here's the benefit of me coming up and lying to you and telling you that there's going to be a massive disaster. If it doesn't happen, what do I get to say next January? Oh, thank God, we dodged a bullet, right? And none of you get mad at me because it was okay. And if I say there's a disaster and there is one next January, you elevate me to prophet status, don't you? The reality of it is all these people that call for these massive black swan events, which by definition you cannot foresee, do they ever put their money where their mouth is? I tell you, they don't. Why do I know that? Because they don't own their own private islands. This is not something that's predictable, what I'm about to share with you. I can only tell you what history would teach me. You got to watch out for cold water up there. Now, if you want to know which model you want to win, you want the Europeans to win right now. Do not want the U.S. models to win. Because the U.S. models, see the black dashed line up there in the top left? They're not just calling for a collapse of El Nino, but like a truly epic collapse of El Nino, such that by next April, May, and June, we'll be having a meeting like this, and I'll be saying, full-blown La Nina, prepare for record drought. The Europeans say, no, slowly let this sucker down. There's more evidence that the Europeans are right on this in terms of their forecast. And that's very good news for all of you in this room. Let's talk about it and we'll wrap this up. Our government released this morning. Red bars, El Nino, probability. Gray bars, neutral, blue, La Nina. They are one of the most aggressive groups that by next summer will be building in La Nina conditions. Now you look at that and everyone in this room says, oh, La Nina, please don't bring that thing back. But we need to know what that could possibly mean because it's actually more important as to how fast you get into it and what the preceding year actually looked like going into it. So I'm going to show you. You ready? What about the rest of winter? Well, I've been telling you for months that the back half of winter was going to be cold. That's all this says. It says prepare for a lot of cold air to come down from the northwest and sneak right across Illinois and get all the way to the south. If there's a spot that stays warm, it's New England. It's that area over there. But normally, when El Niños fade, that's what all those years are, we tend to have normal winter precipitation here. It tends to be okay. I need it to be terrible. That's what I want for all of you. An absolutely terrible winter where you get locked inside and you can't go anywhere and there's a massive run on groceries every 2 weeks and the price of Generac stock goes through the roof because you all buy it. We need that. We need a terrible winter to happen. Right now, it looks like it's going to be closer to average. You say, well, what happens after that? So we're using history as our basis here. History says that spring, March, April, and May, on years with a fading El Nino, that's what those years are, tend to give us really tight windows. Now, I can say that with the support of knowing that for the last 45 years, our spring windows are getting tighter and tighter anyway. In fact, you think about this past year, we only remember the drought that started on May 10th. Remember what happened in April up to May 10th? Any open window you had in the field, you went out there and went after. How many of you had to replant something this spring? Yeah, it was tight early until it all just shut off. I'm worried about that for this spring. I did some research in Illinois, found out that we have lost since 1980 5 workable field days according to the USDA's definition of a workable field day. Doesn't matter anymore because we now know that you can all plant an entire state inside of 10 days. So when the window's open, you go. That's what I'm worried about. Now, anybody in here connected to the cotton industry other than the clothes you're wearing? Good. We need the cotton crop to burn next year. Because if it does in Texas, and down here in the lower Mississippi River Valley, and in the southeast, you know what we get? Storms that run the periphery of the heat. And if it does that, we call them ridge riders. In fact, in Iowa the other day, someone asked me if I had a Harley. I said, why do you ask if I have a Harley? Because I'm going to get you a jacket that says ridge riders on the back of it, because I talk about them all the time. These storms that run over the top, and historically years, June to September, that follow big El Niños do that. Now, here's my last little bit for you today. What does $1 trillion of investment look like in weather forecasting? These 2 maps. 50 years of working on weather forecasting, paying all those salaries, building all those computers to give us this. This is what the Europeans think March, April, and May is going to look like. That's a lot of green. This is what the National Multi-Model Ensemble in the US looks like. There are some similarities. But remember, these folks want to get rid of El Nino faster than those. And this is what summer's currently forecast by the models. So I'm going to tell you something. Every subscription that you all receive that wants to paint 2024 as a disaster, they're not going to show you that map. You're going to get this one. You watch it. You watch. You'll get it. Because if it fades fast, drought spreads out of the plains and east. Here's what I think is going to happen. This will be a summer where we will divide wet versus dry almost on the Mississippi River. I think as we get later into it, if you're east of it, better chances of storms. If you're west of it, the drought will just continue to build the farther you get toward the Great Plains. That's my estimate today. That's not a dangerous or terrible scenario. That's just what we're thinking about with respect to this. So here we go. Here's my last bit today. I don't know how many of you read your Bibles, but at church 2 Sundays ago, the pastor brought up this passage, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my everyday life. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. All of those itching ears were in Iowa yesterday. Now listen, this is what they're worried about. This retired, long-standing, excellent, amazing man did some research back in the early 2000s that said because of the cyclical behavior of sunspots and a drought that happened in 1936, a drought that happened 89 years later, 1847 to 1936, that's the 89 years, that there's going to be another one right here in 2025. He did not put this research through the peer review process. He wrote a paper and just posted it as a blog post onto Iowa State blog. And we've been looking at this because if it's true, it's huge. If it's true, it matters not what Matt said to you earlier. It means get ready for like $12 corn based on what he's calling for. You understand if we do a repeat of 1936 here, what that would decimate, what it would do to our corn crop? And he made this claim back after the 2012 drought. Now, by the way, it doesn't account for any drought in between there, but this claim was that be prepared for 2025 when I'm retired, right? And I'll tell you what's going to happen. So I got really curious about this, and I'm not joking you, when I was a professor, I spent 5 years on a research project that wanted to answer this, and I was not going to publish it because the work I was doing was going to go into my business, and I couldn't find it. No matter what I did, I couldn't find the relationship. I couldn't find that the sunspot cycle, which by the way looks nothing like it did in those previous years, or the fact that the solar cycles are going to have any sort of a correlation to it. I couldn't find it. And you have to understand how bad I wanted to find it. Could you imagine if I was the guy up here that gave you concrete evidence that in 2025 you're going to make a bunch of money, go buy every bit of insurance he just talked about and get ready to farm it because it's going to be a huge, huge, huge year? I would love to be able to say that, and they'd invite me back next year, right, Rod? He'd say, hey, come on back, Eric. Tell us how much worse it's going to get in 2020. I'd be back. But the reality of it is, I couldn't find what he said he found. In fact, you know what I did find? 25 peer-reviewed papers in multiple journals, ranging from atmospheric sciences to geological sciences, that all said drought isn't cyclical. I'd like to prove it to you another way. Now, this is really quite terrifying. I spent 5 years looking at this problem, in addition to teaching and doing all sorts of other stuff. But 5 years I looked at it. I decided last week, I was in Tucson, sitting in my hotel room. My kids were swimming. I was getting ready for my talk the next morning. I'm like, you know, it'd be kind of fun. That data set I used to try to find cyclical behavior in drought that I spent a lot of my life working on, why don't I just ask ChatGPT to do this for me? How many of you have used ChatGPT? Like a few of you have done this. I'm going to show you what ChatGPT did in 9 minutes that took me 5 years. I've sped it up so it doesn't take 9 minutes. I asked it the same questions that I've been asking for all that time. So I fed it all the data. It starts analyzing the data. It says, oh, you want me to process this and start looking for correlations between drought and other things? Yeah. Could you also perform these techniques like principal component analysis, Fourier analysis? Could you look for the moments in the data? Sure. Can you just keep going? I'm like, oh my gosh, oh geez, that plot right there took me 6 months to make. It just made it. And then it says, wait a minute, there's no correlation. Did you see it go by there real fast? And keeps going and says, hey, you want to try something else? I'm like, yeah, let's keep going. Is drought predictable based on your analysis? Tell me, can we use it? Try it. Let's predict the next time series. Go. And it says, all right, let's do this. Go, 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 go. And I'm starting to cry at this point because I'm like, what did I do? I said, yeah, let's use ARIMA. So it does that. You know how long it took me to code that up in real time? Did it in a second. And then at the very end, I said, watch. Let's explore more advanced models like using machine learning. Oh, sure, Eric. Let's get that done for you. How about a random forest? Fourier analysis. Yes, please. 9 minutes. And then I said, can you use the last 4 years of data to predict the next 10? And it says, well, we'll do this. Why not? And it gave me a line graph. And the line graph, I'll blow it up for you here, looks like this. Now, you all need to listen to me very, very carefully. No tweets, no misunderstanding. If you simply use Fourier analysis or a random tree machine learning model on history, it actually says 2025 drought area will be reduced to less than 30%. It says the next major drought is in 2030. And listen, all of this is garbage. It's all garbage. This isn't real. It's not real. It's not real because for the 5 years I spent working on it, you know what we discovered about drought behavior? That it's nonlinear and chaotic. That's the first thing. You know the second thing is, there has been times where this state has been in D3 drought and had above trend yields. Because if you get a just-in-time rain, your crop will perform. It's a living organism. It does not care about drought area. You give it the right water at the right time, it's going to try to get what it needs to get. So everything you just saw here is a load of crap. So what do you need to know? Listen, and then I'll shut up. Watch this. If the Bermuda high is in place, the Pacific high is in place, it storms. And that's what we get all summer. You take the Bermuda high and move it like it did in 2023, all of that goes away. Especially if the Pacific high leaves with it. You end up getting something called an omega block right in the middle part of the country. 88, 12, the beginning of 23, 80, go back to any year historically, and you want to know what happens when there's drought, the Bermuda high and the Pacific high go somewhere. When it turns April, you don't know this, but every morning I just wake up and look for them. Where's the Bermuda high? Because if it's in place, moisture pumps on, it's going to storm. Now, remember what I told you about 10 minutes ago? When that all happens, the first thing to start to trickle toward the risk of drought increasing is the water gets cold right there. So if you want a takeaway, the takeaway today for me is, right now, no one can predict what this upcoming summer is going to be. Not even close. I've said this to this group 1,000 times. If I could, I would have driven north on 57 today, not south. Gone to the Board of Trade, retired tomorrow. Matt would have done the same thing. Remember I told you, I don't know if the market's going to go up 20 cents real quick tomorrow. If he actually knew that, all those acres he bought would have been sold. Wife would have been happy because he would have cashed in tomorrow. That's what happens in nonlinear chaotic systems, and the atmosphere is one of them. So we're up against this. And last year when that drought settled in, Canada took the brunt of it. 20 million hectares of land in Canada burned. And this is a fast animation through May, June, and July of a year ago, what all that smoke looked like. Do you all remember July 16th? That's when smoke from a fire 2,000 miles away in British Columbia got all the way down to the surface and went right across Illinois. Sunday morning, people were asking me if it was the end of the world. I'm like, no, it's just a Canadian wildfire. You just don't normally smell it. That's how dry it is in and around us. It's absolutely crazy to think about. This has got to be the thing I want you to think about the most. Spring is coming, and you need to be insured against some of the issues that we can have in spring. On March 31st of last year, 188 tornadoes hit the midsection of the country. This is one of them up in Iowa. These tornadoes, when they come through, can do a tremendous amount of damage. This is another one in Kansas. This guy chases them with drones. Got a better career than I do. He's out there chasing these things, getting incredible footage. What I want you to remember about these kind of events is that we've been studying how they've been shifting around for a while. And stuff like this has been becoming more frequent along the Mississippi Basin. And independent research done at Northern Illinois University, the University of Illinois, and Oklahoma University have all arrived at this map. And what it shows you is that over the last 40 plus years, Tornado Alley, which used to run from Texas, North Dakota, Colorado, Illinois, it's been shifting here. We've already had in December a massive severe weather outbreak that hit the Mid-South. We had one last week that started in Texas, went all the way over to the southeast. Another one today that's going to start here and go there as well. This whole shift east of severe weather means to go through a crop year without protection is a bad idea. Because Mother Nature loves to produce derechos. How many of you 10 years ago knew what a derecho was? Probably nobody. In fact, probably nobody knew what it was before 2020. I mean, I know you had a big one back here in 2008, but it wasn't called that. These kinds of events coming through are starting to become more frequent. So we got to keep thinking about it. And by the way, we call that the whale's mouth. This was up in Pierce, South Dakota. This is the hail that one put down. Absolutely massive. So get prepared for this stuff. Now, I'm going to give you one last funny story to talk about over lunch. 30 seconds, here you go. Hurricane Lee shows up in the middle of the hurricane season. I get a phone call from all of my clients in North and South Carolina. I said, can you put together a forecast video to tell us if Lee is going to hit North Carolina? I said, you bet. Because in 2018, there was another hurricane in the same spot at the same strength named Florence. Florence hit Wilmington, North Carolina near Cape Fear, and in 2 days dropped 57 inches of rain. Do you understand that if we got 57 inches of rain, that's not biblical drought that Matt was talking about, that's chapter 7 Genesis flooding. And there it is, the storm's out there. He said, forecast. So I spent 4 hours putting together my latest thoughts, and I said, it's going to miss you. Don't worry about it. It's going to go probably hit Nova Scotia or Maine or Newfoundland. It's gone. Don't worry about it. Video goes out. I get 3,700 views of this video in 2 hours, and I'm feeling like just this great scientist in my basement gloating over my success of getting 3,700 people to listen to me. One of them emails me back at noon. Says, have you heard about this girl? I'm like, no. TikTok video. She uses a different technique than I use to forecast the weather. She uses her psychic visions. And she says, I think I just narrowed down where Hurricane Lee is going to go. I drew it down for you. In fact, I didn't just draw this on a piece of paper. I drew this with my eyes closed. And now she's got the whole audience wrapped into this. Like, wait a minute, you put a pen to paper with your eyes closed and you drew that? She goes, yeah. And you notice that little weird bump out right there? Doesn't it look just like the coast of North Carolina? Her whole TikTok video is 90 seconds. And at the end of it, she says, I would honestly be shocked if this was wrong. It's going to hit North Carolina. Now, this was a response to someone who watched my video, where I said it's going to hit Maine. And then I scrolled down to the bottom. Remember how many views I had? She had 13.6 million views. I'm going to ask you to be savvy consumers of the garbage that's on the internet. Because you know what happened? I was right. That's where the hurricane went. It hit Maine. And instead of people going, Eric, thanks. Whew, that was scary for a while. I had people at Acadia emailing me. They were angry that they couldn't go out and see the ocean that day because the waves were 50 feet tall. So this is what I'm up against. Messy bun and a groundhog, and that's my life, right? So that's all I know today. I'm going to stop because I can smell the food now. Thanks for giving me some time. I'll be around for questions if you have any, but I'll turn it back over to you guys, or over here.